went to the Congress and said we now, because the terrorists are under every bedpost and behind every toilet and inside every refrigerator. And if we don't have these powers, we will not be kept safe. And so the Patriot Act, which is 315 pages long, which basically amends hundreds and hundreds of other statutes. So in order to read the Patriot Act, you not only need the act itself in front of you, you need the entire United States Code, which is about the size of 8 or 10 sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. I've read it 3 times, and it takes about 20 hours to read each time. The Patriot Act was posted on the House intranet, the internal internet, to which only members of the House of Representatives and their senior staff have access, for 15 minutes before the vote. There was no debate on the floor of the House, and the Patriot Act was enacted.
That's it.
Well, got to pass the law to see what's in the law. Yeah, while you're going to just minimize it over there, and go to
there was no debate
2 out of 3.
on the floor of the House.
Just mention a couple things. Judge Napolitano, in my opinion, is probably the greatest living constitutional expert who's on TV. And so and he's very popular, and you know the way that it works in politics, you got someone who's popular, you got to co-opt them and bring him in. So they hired him, gave him his own TV show, which was very popular. And he was on it for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, whatever it was. But he and O'Reilly, from the very beginning, bumped heads on the thing because overall, Fox News it's not conservative versus liberal. Fox is Republican, and ABC, NBC, MSNBC, CBS, and CNN are Democratic media. They always support the Democratic candidate. Fox always supports the Republican candidate, even when they say they wouldn't, like when they thought McCain wasn't going to get it, and they said, we'll never support him. But they had to once they were. Well, at any rate, so he gets on there, and eventually, after years, O'Reilly fires him because he wouldn't be controlled. He's just going to, tell it like it is. The Constitution is easy to read. We know exactly what these things are and so on, and whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they got to obey the Constitution. The second thing I would just say is about, in other words, I'm a great fan of Judge Napolitano. He talked about the Patriot Act and this thing, and somebody joked here about, you got to know, it's like Nancy Pelosi said, you got to vote for it to see what's in it. The sad thing is that starting with the Patriot Act, and now on every single major piece of legislation, it is the rule rather than the exception that they don't get to read it. They didn't get to read the Military Commissions Act of 2006 that gives the president the right to designate someone. It's like a bill of attainder, to just designate someone as an enemy combatant. No judge involved whatsoever. He's an enemy combatant. You lock him up. The NDAA in 2011, Defense Authorization Act, that authorizes the president to keep someone indefinitely in jail with no due process whatsoever. Don't charge him with a crime, no lawyer, no nothing, because it's going to fight it's always in the national security right. And the Obamacare is probably the latest, greatest example. What is that? Dang, people, turn off your phones. There we go. I probably have my 45th grandbaby now. She's been in labor for Let's see. Oh, and so he's talking about reading the bills and so on. Patriot Act's 315 pages. They only had 15 minutes on the House intranet. If you've ever read bills, anyone here ever read legislative bills? You can get used to them. You can read them a lot faster. If it takes him 20, 30 hours, it's going to take me 40, 50 hours, and it's going to take somebody who had never read it 400 hours to read it, because it doesn't just read like a novel, 315 pages. You look at it, and after going through the definitions and so on, and gets to the substance, it might say USC 24, Section 13, Section 1, subsection I, is changed to read as the legislature proposes. Well, you have no idea what that means until you get out the U.S. Code, which is way bigger than you can put your arms around, and you find it and you see what words they would make in the middle of that particular sentence, And it really takes some time. Every single thing, just about, you have to have to do that. And so the bottom line is nobody knew what they were signing. He'll tell you about a little summary that they got, but it didn't. And that is the rule right now. On major pieces of legislation, they don't get to read it. These are grown-up people.
Crazy.
I mean, this is Louis Gohmert, for Pete's sake.
He reads more than anybody.
Right now, probably than Louis Gohmert. If I gave you a sheet of paper, blank, and said, just sign on the bottom and I'll fill it in later, every one of you would tell me what I could do with that sheet of paper. Anybody would. Kids would not do that. And yet our grown-ups in our national legislature operate on that basis. Is it timidity? Is it cowardice? Is it stupidity? Are they do they trust? As he'll point out, well, we trusted George W. Bush. Yeah, but you can give that power to all other presidents too. Let's talk one about. Let's go ahead and do that.
There was no debate on the floor of the House, and the Patriot Act was enacted. There was a debate on the floor of the Senate. Only one senator conceded that he read it. Paul Wellstone, who's now dead. He's one of the two who voted against it. A half dozen courageous members of the House of Representatives, like Ron Paul, said, how the heck can you expect me to vote on something that you won't let me read?
Only 6 out of 435 voted against it.
The Patriot Act lets federal agents write their own search warrants. We have come 360 degrees from fighting a revolution against a tyrannical government because it dispatched its agents to write their own search warrants, to establishing a constitution which assured us that that would never happen and required that when the government wants anything from you, it has to go to a judge, to popularly electing members of Congress who would vote to gut the Constitution and remove the second most important right in it and let federal agents write their own search warrants. And that's what this monstrosity of the so-called Patriot Act does. When I was giving a speech similar to this in another state in the Midwest, there were a lot of members of Congress there, about a half a dozen of whom came up to me afterwards and said, we voted for the Patriot Act. We didn't know that it allowed agents to write their own search warrants. We never heard that before. Now, you then ask them a question. Lawyers like to ask questions that they already know the answer to. Question, did you read it? No, we didn't. Question, did you read anything before you voted on it? Answer, yes. Question, what did you read? We read a summary of it. Question, prepared by whom? By the Justice Department. Well, of course the Justice Department is not going to tell you the powers that you're giving to it to make it the decider and it the person and entity that can violate privacy. So these sad, sorry people, and in their fear, enacted legislation that would subvert the Constitution. And some of them said, well, you know, we did this because we trusted George W. Bush. Trusted him with what? We are a government of laws and not of men. We have a constitution that divides power, that keeps the states sovereign, that requires checks and balances. We don't give this kind of power to any single human being. It was the states who created the federal government and not the other way around. And power given to the federal government can be taken back.
Or power taken by the federal government unjustly can be taken back.
I believe in all my heart that the individual is greater than the government, that every individual is greater than any government, because we have immortal souls that can glorify God forever. The government is an artificial creation based on fear and force. You don't have to take my word for that, because the first president of the United States said the government is based on force. And the second president of the United States said the government is based on fear. That's why governments like to fight wars, because war is the health of the state. And when the government fights a war, it can take more of our money and take more of our freedom, and we will give it to them because we think it is keeping us safe. Liberty lost never comes back. So we have a government that claims that it will uphold the Constitution of the United States, that nevertheless, without even allowing members of Congress to read the documents that assault our basic liberties, violates that very oath. One time I was having a debate on air with one of my more irritable, irascible colleagues with an ego the size of the state of Pennsylvania. It might not even be big enough for him. I won't mention any names. And we were debating whether or not President Bush or any president could declare a human being an enemy combatant and lock them up and throw away the key and strip them of all of their rights. And I made the argument that you've heard me make now, which is that our rights are natural and our rights can't be taken away by an act of the Congress or a command of the president, but only after a jury trial, after we've been convicted of violating somebody else's rights. And I said to this irritable colleague of mine, you only like this law, you only support the right of the president to do this because you trust him. What will you do, this was before the Democratic primaries, what will you do if Hillary becomes president and she declares you to be an enemy combatant? And he said to me, well, Judge, if Hillary becomes president and declares me an enemy combatant and ships me to Gitmo, would you come and visit me? And I looked at him and I said, Bill? No. Because she'll probably want to keep me there too. There's a member of the president's cabinet. She's the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. I frequently forget her last name. Janet, what's her name? Absolutely, positively no relation whatsoever.
Right.
Issues a report saying that people that believe in Second Amendment rights and people who have been veterans returning from the wars, whether just or unjust, and people who question the power of the government and people who believe in the right to life are dangerous extremists. I said to my friends that I work with who are just as upset over this report as you are, well, she knows that I'm right to life, and she knows that I believe that the right to carry a gun is a natural right, and she knows that I question the power of the government. She knows that because she hears me say it on the air every day. But how does she know it about the average American? Because she inherited the powers that the Republican Congress gave to a Republican president. Because her agents can write their own search warrants and go to your doctor, your lawyer, your telephone company, your computer server, even the post office, and read your mail and look at your records without having to get a warrant from a judge. Because her agents can capture the keystrokes that you touch on your computer without having to go to a federal judge to get that power. Because your buddy, George W. Bush, and the Republicans gave the president that power, and now it's in the hands of somebody that they don't trust. Don't they even know basic history? Give that kind of power to any human being who you like, and it will be passed to someone who doesn't like you. That's why we have a Constitution. So that kind of power cannot be in the hands of one person. That's why we have checks and balances. That's why the states can nullify a law of the Congress that interferes with their sovereignty.
According to John Roberts.
7 more minutes, and it's the best part. We want to get that part 3 of 3. Let's just start right there, I guess.
The other day I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal about whether or not the Congress could, under the Constitution, regulate health care. Obviously, it can't. Health care is not mentioned in the Constitution. The framers had doctors. The framers had hospitals. The framers got sick. The framers needed health care. It was beyond their wildest imaginings that they would be creating a government that would somehow be able to regulate this kind of human behavior. But they did give the Congress a very unique power called the power to regulate interstate commerce. Madison argued that to regulate means, and this is what it meant at the time, if you have an Oxford English Dictionary which gives you the history of the meaning of words throughout history, to regulate meant to keep regular. It meant to make sure that there is commerce between the states, not to allow the Congress to regulate everything under the sun, like the conditions of employment or the hourly wages or the materials used to make up the article that moves in interstate commerce, but just to make sure that interstate commerce is regular, to prevent, for example, the state of Pennsylvania from saying to merchants in New Jersey, you can't sell your goods here, only local merchants in Pennsylvania can sell them. That's what the Commerce Clause was written for. But Congress, of course, has used it to regulate the air that you breathe and the water that you drink and the force of the shower in your home and the size of your toilet bowl and the number of legs on your desk chair, and on and on and on. Do you know that the Congress has used the Interstate Commerce Clause to make it a crime for you to speak the truth? If an FBI agent shows up at your house with a self-written search warrant, the agent will tell you, you may not tell anyone about this. You may not tell your spouse in the bedroom. You may not tell a priest in the confessional. You may not tell your lawyer in her or his office. You may not tell anyone in whom you confide. You can't even answer truthfully in a courtroom under oath whether or not you received one of these warrants without violating the Patriot Act. Well, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, 2 FBI agents showed up and delivered one of these handwritten search warrants to an 86-year-old librarian. She looked at them and said, "Who the hell are you and what the hell is this?" And she handed it to her 76-year-old assistant, whereupon they were arrested because she revealed to another human being that the FBI had come calling. They were indicted and they were tried. And your federal government attempted to put an 86-year-old librarian and her 76-year-old assistant in a federal prison for 5 years because they told people that federal agents came calling with a self-written search warrant. Do you really think you have the power to do that under the Constitution? Now, the words that I just articulated are not mine. They're the words of the very courageous federal judge to whom, fortunately for the defendants and unfortunately for the government, this case was assigned. Because after the jury was impaneled, the government decided to withdraw the charges. They somehow thought that they would lose the case. The judge was about to declare the Patriot Act unconstitutional. Now you see how insidious the government is. If there's no case in front of a judge, then the judge loses the power to declare the law on which the case is based unconstitutional. So fearing that this courageous federal judge had been unconstitutional, not caring what it did to the life of the 86-year-old or the 76-year-old, not concerned with its oath to uphold about serving self-written search warrants and telling people, if you tell anyone about it, we'll come after you because you spoke the truth. So the same government now wants to use the same powers under the Constitution to regulate health care. Let's see. Medicare broke. Social Security broke. Medicaid broke. Amtrak broke. The post office broke. Who in their right mind with that track record would give health care to the same people that have broken everything they've tried to manage?
Amen.
And even if they did a wonderful job at it, they don't have the right under the Constitution. It's reserved for the states for all of those things. Yeah.
Ask your member of Congress, whoever she or he may be, where in the Constitution is it authorized for the federal government to regulate health care? They will not be able to answer that question. Now, these gatherings to which I am privileged to attend. Last Saturday, I spoke to 25,000 people in the pouring rain in Fort Worth, Texas, and a month before that, to about 10,000 people in Columbus, Ohio. These gatherings are more important than anything you can imagine, because in the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its maximum hour of danger. You are that generation. This is your role. Now is that time. Freedom must be defended from every assailant in every corner of this country, from outside the country, from inside the country, and especially from the government that wants to take it away from us. God bless you.
You know, just 1 minute. Granted, he did talk about some things that we haven't talked about yet, but we're going to. And I promise you, in the next few weeks, there won't be any part of the Constitution that you haven't, it's important that you care about, whether it's the Fourth Amendment or the Article 1, Section 8, it's the national powers versus the 10th Amendment that reserves everything else to the states. You're gonna understand, because the good news is we have this wonderfully, it's okay, oh I see. We have this wonderfully simple document that's very understandable once you get past a few of those odd colonial terms, you know, that they use. And but I wanted to do this as just a transition between what we have been talking about, natural rights and so on, and as we get into the Constitution. Next week we're going to talk about federalism. It may sound boring, but it's right at the heart. It's the big elephant in the room. It's what's being ignored every single day by our president, by our Congress, by our U.S. Supreme Court. Article 1, Section 8, national powers versus the 10th Amendment, state powers. And then is that next week?
October 6th. I don't have anything down yet for.
Does anyone have that? We're doing the movie one of those weeks. And then we'll get into the Constitution.
I think the movie next week.
Is the movie next week?
Third week.
The making of the Constitution?
Let me see.
Next week is the structure and characteristics. The week after that is the DVD of the movie.
Yeah.
Week 4. Week 3 is the structure and characteristics.
So we are going to, I guess I had decided I want to go ahead and get into the Constitution. At least the overall structure and characteristics, we'll go through it really, really quick.
Yeah. And
later we will go through it in detail, as much detail as we want to go into these.
Week 5 is the federalism.
So
week 5 is federalism.
Week 5 is federalism. I'm doing it differently than we're doing. Okay.
Or you can change it.
So we'll get into the Constitution next week, and there. We're over time tonight. I apologize. We're over just a few minutes. Does anyone have anything that they really want to?
Things we need to discuss it and vote on it. You can't just arbitrarily take over.
Hey, I'm game there. I mean, I'm willing. I don't want to be in charge of this.
They can do it till we stop it.
Yeah.
I'd like to say one thing. There's this calendar. It's the
Homeland Owners Association. And so for every Tuesday, there's supposed to be information on every class. So if you go to the right-hand side, the calendar, you click on our class for Tuesday, it'll expand with the YouTubes that we had this week, and also the syllabus that he will have there for next week.
What is the web address?
It's homelandownersassociation.com. Homelandownersassociation.com. Okay. Did you have fun? Did you learn anything?